Hello, Source Booksellers, YouTube watchers. Thank you so much for joining us. I have a little echo because we have some technical issues, but today we're celebrating noticing with Richard Louv, who is a journalist and an author of 11 books, including The Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficient Disorder, and is the co-founder and chair emeritus of the nonprofit Children and Nature Network. He was awarded the Audubon Medal, and so we are very excited for him to be able to be in conversation with our very own, Detroit's very own Birch Kemp from Arboretum Detroit. They help trees, help when you donate to them, this nonprofit, you help Arboretum Detroit help trees. Birch was a long-time high school teacher and is part of the Land Back and Treehouse communities. And so we do want to welcome him, but because my sound is a little not so good, I'm going to let Mr. Louv speak a little bit.
Okay. We've all been having technical difficulties today. I'm thinking about writing a new book that would be called Every Upgrade is a Downgrade, the Case Against Progress. What, Allison?
Oh, sorry.
You want me to keep talking? Okay, all right. Noticing this book is my 11th book. It's the 5th book that I've done about the human relationship with nature and about what I've called nature deficit disorder. I arrived at that term with Last Child in the Woods, which was published in 2005, 20 years ago, more than 21 years ago. And it was about the disconnect of children from the natural world, which means human beings from the natural world because they grow up. To my surprise, that led to a movement of sorts. Actually, it's a pretty big movement. And the Children and Nature Network is the nonprofit that grew out of Last Child. And it has been working now in 100 communities where it's trying to get people to have natural play spaces, to have nature preschools, have teachers that are taking kids outdoors. There's a long list of things. One of the things that happened with Last Child is I was invited to give the keynote speech to the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2005. They wanted me to talk about nature deficit disorder. This is several thousand doctors in the room. My wife noticed I was nervous because, really, you want me to talk about nature deficit disorder? I always caution, this is not a known medical diagnosis, but it's a way to talk about this big change that many of us have sensed for a long time. So my wife saw that I was nervous before I flew up to talk to the physicians, the pediatricians, several thousands of them. So she's a retired nurse practitioner. So she took my face in her hands and she said, "Rich, listen to me. Pediatricians are different from other doctors. They're really nice people. So I opened with that and got off on a good start with with the pediatricians. All doctors are nice people. I have to amend that quickly. I suggested that they might want to start prescribing nature because it's connected to so many positive results. With health, with physical health, with cognitive health, and with health. When I wrote Last Child, I could only find 60 studies in the whole world, and I had a couple of very good academics helping me look for them, about the benefits of being outside to children and adults, to their health and their cognition. I couldn't find any more than 60 that covered that or covered the disengagement of children from nature. Today, there's more than 1,500. It's probably around 1,700 today. There's a research library on the site on Children Nature Network that you can find. And it has independently written abstracts of over 1,500 studies. And they're free. You can use them to go to your principals and go to your mayor and suggest that, if we really want to do something about ADHD, we might want to look at getting kids outdoors into nature, not just any outdoors, but connected with the natural world. In low-income neighborhoods where the prenatal problems are higher in those kind of neighborhoods, ones that had nature in them, a park, some kind of nature that kids went to, the rate was lower for prenatal death for children, for babies. So for a lot of people, this is not a nice to have. It's a matter of life and death. And we're only now realizing that the type of research that's happened in the last 20 years is astonishing. Before that, the academic world was pretty much ignoring this issue, but now they're not. And now pediatricians all over the country and Canada and some other countries are beginning to actually literally write prescriptions to go outside in nature. They don't always call it a prescription because they often call it a recommendation, because apparently to some doctors, a prescription has to be for drugs.
So
in any case, they're going in the right direction.
So I think forest bathing should be a prescription.
Yeah. Well, it is in some places. It is happening. You gave me a very good opportunity to segue into noticing the new book. One of the first research trips I did, I live up in the mountains. My wife and I moved to the mountains east of San Diego about 7 years ago because of our nature deficit disorder. We have mountain lions that come through our yard. I know that because I keep cameras out there. We've got a big bobcat that's been hanging out lately. I like to call him Bob, but when he's bad, I call him Robert. He's a great bobcat. We have possums and a den of foxes, and foxes are wonderful to watch with the trail cam. So we can see from our front window a mountain called Vulcan Mountain. It's the oldest, it's actually a range, but people call it Vulcan Mountain. It's the oldest range of mountains in San Diego County. San Diego County, by the way, has the highest biodiversity of any county in the United States. So I'm surrounded by a wealth of wildlife and plants and trees, and consider myself, and I am very privileged to be able to decide to live here. One day, a nature therapist took some of us, about 5 women and me, took us up Vulcan Mountain near the top and did forest bathing, as Allison mentioned. And it was really extraordinary experience. She would give us assignments to go out and sit under a tree or find a tree that you relate to, and then come back later and tell us what you learned from the tree. I know this sounds real new agey, but there's scientific evidence that suggests some of the chemicals that are emitted by trees raise our mood, help us in ways that we don't fully understand. So then later, the therapist would blow her a flute, a little ocarina, and we would come back and sit in a circle. And as I listened to the women tell their stories, they sounded, I'd heard this format before. One woman said that she picked a tree that had fallen, and she felt the pain of that tree that had fallen. But she also felt the pain of the trees that had caught that tree. I wondered about her life. Again and again, people came back having seen something. Often they did not understand it. And this was not really a work of the imagination. They had seen something, but they didn't know what it was. Over time, and this happened a lot, I began to think, where do fairy tales come from? Human beings have been going out into the forest since we began. And I've become convinced that the forest is enchanted, but not in the way that we usually think of it. I coined a word for this book, which is bioenchantment. One of the things that's happened in the last 15 years is the huge amount of studies done of how complicated nature is around us. The communication, I sometimes call this the great conversation going on all around us. Trees are connected underneath the surface of the earth by mycelium, by fungi. Whole forests are connected. It's kind of an internet of nature. That's being studied now. There's a lot more detail to this, but there are civilizations under our feet when we're in the forest or in a city too. And so that we're picking up, that we're sensing, I think. We don't exactly know what it is, though, that we sense, because we're only now realizing that we're not usually using all of our senses. The other body of research that's emerged, which is really fascinating, is about our human senses. The people who study the human senses no longer talk about 5 senses. They talk conservatively about 9 or 10. Some of these scientists talk about as many as 30 or even 100. Now they get very complex at the far end of that because those senses start to work together and sometimes do strange things. Some people can see colors when they listen to music. In any case, we're now learning about these senses that we have, and I would conclude, know more than we know. We sense more than we sense. So I've decided the woods are enchanted. But what we're sensing is all of that life, all of those connections between species, within species, across species, sometimes with us if we notice. And we've never really fully understood that as human beings. And what do human beings do is something we don't understand. In nature, they anthropomorphize it. They begin to explain it in human form, elves, leprechauns, and so forth. So I think this may be where elves come from. But I think it's a lot more interesting than Colson.
So you mentioned music, the art and music of nature.
I interviewed many musicians, or some musicians, and some artists. Some of them live here in the mountains, and some of them live elsewhere. And interestingly, scientists and artists are working together here and there more than they have in the past. They respect each other's, or at least the ones that are working like this, they respect each other's ability to see and feel and sense and test. There's a woman that I interviewed, an artist who was actually inspired by my last book, by Our Wild Calling, to do more art in nature. What she does is she goes out into the forest and she finds a sit spot, a place she returns to again and again. And she sits down and watches and waits. And if she sits there long enough, life shows up. Maybe it's a den of foxes. And as she's sitting there watching them, she thinks of their stories. Who are these foxes? What did they eat this morning? What's the kids, the baby foxes' relationship with each other? Again, this echo of fairy tales. But she's actually seeing and trying to understand their stories. She takes a quick picture of the foxes, then she goes back to her studio and she paints them. And when you look at these paintings, I swear you can see the foxes' stories in their eyes. There's another artist that does this, the famous Robert Bateman in Canada, who's an icon in Canada in terms of his wildlife art. I visited his studio once, and I walked in and there were giant pictures on the walls. For instance, there was a giant picture of a bear. That bear looked like he was stepping out of the wall. And again, you could see stories from that bear in its eyes. I said, Bob, how'd you do that? And he said, I became the bear. Again and again, that theme comes up, relating so closely, noticing so much that the distance between species begins to go away, or at least to soften. Many artists are doing that. Many people do nature journaling, which is a way to, anybody can go out and experience nature, notice it. You do drawings and paintings in your notebook that you keep. The notebook becomes a work of art. You write poetry in there about what you've noticed. And that's catching on. A lot of people are doing that now. And it's a different way of perceiving nature. I can't hear you, Allison.
I was trying to bring Birch back up. When you mentioned trees, I'm sure he was like, even with the echo, I want to say something. But now he's sort of disconnected again. So I'm going to ask you one more thing. The bio-enchantment, is that what you mentioned?
That's right.
You, in the book, in that part of the book, you talk about the mountains or living in the mountains and its impact. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, anybody who lives somewhere where there's a lot of nature, if they're open to it at all, is changed over time. Being here has enriched my wife and I. In fact, the idea for this book came one day when I was on a walk up our road, and there's forests on both sides. And I was thinking to myself, I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was missing my old, this is at the end of the pandemic, I was missing my old buddies in journalism. I was missing a newsroom. And I was missing the act of reporting, missing going into a room to interview a politician and noticing that he had a red, or she had a red pen in the pocket, and noticing how other people looked at that politician, taking all that detail back, and that helps me write the story. That's noticing. And I was feeling sorry because I don't do that much anymore because newspapers, so many newspapers have died. But then I suddenly, Rick's still doing it. Look up the road. A bunch of turkeys, wild turkeys, were crossing the road, baby turkeys and mother turkeys. And I started watching them, and I'd already been noticing, but I didn't really realize it. The iridescence in the feathers of their wings is amazing. I watched how they pecked and how they found the food on the ground. So, I was already noticing, and I said, it's all around you. Start realizing what's around you and connect to it. Begin to understand it. And that's where this book came from. That's where it started.
I love it. So my husband and I, we tent camp, and we love to identify that's a fox or a deer, the deer eating the cherries, or just to be away and sort of just engulfed in the lake or the trees. And so that's been sort of a passion project for us in the summer. And so I'm happy for Michigan, Upper Michigan.
Oh, well, that's a great place to notice nature. I interviewed all kinds of people for this book, people like you, Allison. I interviewed artists and musicians. I interviewed indigenous people who live in this area, Kumeyaay people. Interviewed my neighbors, including one guy that told me about his experience in Vietnam when they ran into a heron in the woods, and it was wounded. And my friend Mark picked up that bird and carried it with him for days. The other soldiers were saying, put that down, it's a target, it's gonna attract attention. He said, no, it's not. These birds are out here all the time. Whether it would have attracted attention or not, he held on to it. He slept with it at night when they were in the swamps, in the mud. And the bird began to get stronger. And one day he held up the bird, and it flew into the air and flew above the horizon of trees. And in that moment, Mark said he felt lifted out of the war. And he's held on to that feeling. And he lives right down the hill here. And almost every night he sits on his back deck and waits for a heron, a white egret to fly from one end of the valley that he's looking down into to the other. That stays with him. Story after story that people told me held great meaning for them that came from noticing nature. And it was a privilege to listen to their stories.
So who do you wish to read this book?
Well, there's no one category of people. I think that scientists as well as artists will find something in the book. I hope that educators read it. The Children Nature Network has done a lot of work in schools, and it's beginning to catch on, this idea of nature-based preschools. More and more schools take the kids outdoors, or at least try to, and they've got natural play spaces now, replacing the concrete and the asphalt with grass and gardens and so forth. There's growing interest in education about improving cognitive functioning through connection to nature, as well as mental health and physical health. I think what noticing is about is the next step. I'll tell you a brief story that would illustrate that. I think it was Michigan. I was in speaking at a nature center in upstate Michigan. And this is a very special place. It's near the Canadian border, and wolves come through the land of that nature center. And I was talking to a young educator there who worked there. She was wearing kind of a khaki uniform. And there was another educator next to her. And I said, what's the thing that the kids and the parents are most attracted to in this nature center, the land around it? She said, the pond. And I could see the pond down the hill. And she said, when people approach that pond, all the frogs jump at the same time into the water. I said, well, what do you do with the kids at the pond? She says, well, we test the pH of the water. Now, the pH of the water is important. But I asked her, do you ever take the kids down and just sit and ask the kids to wait for the frogs to come back up one at a time as they pop up? And then imagine what it must be like to be a frog. Do you ever do that? And she said, no, we test the pH of the water. The guy standing next to her told me later that he sympathized with her. He said she could not really hear my question, in a sense, because she's under such pressure from state standards, regional standards, etc., to teach to the test. And so often nature is turned into math. And that works for some people, and that's not unimportant. But there was a study of indigenous kids in the upper Midwest that showed that they were really good at biology in school until around 8th grade. And I remember 8th grade. I was the kid that neighbors would call if there was a snake in the yard and make sure it wasn't poisonous. I was in the woods all the time. And so I related to this because in 8th grade, they turned biology into math. I was lousy at math. Again, that's not unimportant. It's very important to look at nature from that point of view. But from an empathetic point of view, it doesn't quite work. And the study said that the young indigenous kids just turned off to biology around 8th grade. I think this is something that kids want to know about. I mean, what self-respecting boy or girl would not want to find out about their super senses? That they have ways of knowing the world that they're already using, perhaps, and they don't know they're using, and they can learn to use better. That ought to be a part of education too.
And I think the gift too of the being natural world, and it helps to heal us. And and also in noticing, I think it could um, reconnect us or calm us. What do you think?
Well, it does both, I think. There's a couple other trends that have converged with the upshot, the more research on this question. The rise in mental illness among kids, it's getting younger and younger. The lack of authenticity in life, increasingly, as AI comes in, as a kind of phony politics fills our news sources. People don't know what's real anymore. I have to confess that I look at Instagram way too much. And I've seen an acceleration of, cat videos in which the cat does something that cats can't do. And you have to look at it very closely. And then some people will say, that's AI, that's AI.
Yeah, like dance.
Yeah. Isn't the cat enough? They do this with wild animals, and it distorts our image of what life is about and what those animals are. By the way, I have a theory that the only thing holding civilization together today is funny cat videos. I'm a sucker for them. I watch them all the time. Well, not all the time. But that sense of unreality is growing. It just feels like it's growing every month. Nature is authentic. You can't fool a tree. When you're out there, life feels real. And it is real, including the risk that comes with it, and the beauty, and the mystery. That calms us. Ironically, and I say this in the book, during a time of climate change, whatever we want to call it, biodiversity collapse, great destruction to nature. The odd and counterintuitive thing that I found is that people were calmed. They were soothed when they went out in nature, the very thing that is being destroyed. Again, that may sound counterintuitive, but it's very important because it's real. If we're going to have an effective environmental movement in the future, we have to do two things. We have to connect kids to nature because they grow up. But the other thing is, I think we have to connect them and ourselves in a new way where we go deeper into what nature means and what we hear and see and sense from it with our 30-odd senses. It is much more complex than we think. One of the other trends is in research. Last 15 years, the amount of research done on the sheer complexity of the nature around us, I call it around us the great conversation. A lot of people heard that conversation of animals and plants during the pandemic. When they looked out the window, I heard this from a lot of parents and saw that there were birds in the tree, and they'd never seen, well, they'd seen the birds before, but had they really seen them? And stuck indoors with their kids, they watched the wildlife in their backyards and in the trees or on the window ledge across the street, and they felt less alone. That's what this great conversation does for us, one of the many things. We're not alone, even though the loneliness epidemic has grown and grown. We've seen a lot of reporting on that. There is something in us as a species that needs to know we're not alone in the universe. It's been true from the beginning. There are, of course, religious implications of that, to that. But there are also other implications. The fact is, we're not alone. We're surrounded by a complexity of life. We have whole civilizations under our feet of insects that revive the planet in many ways. More and more research has been done on this. You can't pick up a magazine or a newspaper and find some new way that bees communicate, some new mystery. Part of noticing is noticing that and seeing our lives in that perspective, that we're not alone. If we're going to have effective environmental movement in the future, it has to move in that direction. Otherwise, over time, it will become unreal also, like the videos of animals
Of the
we see on
cats.
Instagram. Yeah.
I totally agree. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for working with your technology and being with us. Congratulations on the release of this book. Noticing is available at source booksellers and everywhere that books are sold. Make sure you get this book. I'm sure Birch would have loved to talk to you about trees, and maybe in the future. Thank you so much for being with us. We also sell Tristan Gooley's book, How to Read Water, How to Read a Tree. And so this is an added title to all of those books.
Yeah, please tell Birch I was sorry we didn't get to talk. He looks like a great guy. And maybe someday soon we'll have that talk.
Awesome. I'll send you some information on his arboretum.
Okay. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Bye.